In January 1993, a man checked a Do Hotel in Paris. He had traveled from North Carolina for his father's funeral and he decided to stay a few extra days. That night, in his hotel room, he went to sleep and never woke up. His name was Andrei Rosimov. The world knew him as Andre the Giant. He was 7 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 520 pounds. He was, by some measures, one of the largest humans who ever lived. He died of congestive heart failure, and the cause of his enormous size, the cause of his fame, and the cause of his early death, all three were the same thing. But here's the strange part. The thing that killed Andre at 46 is the same thing that helped Lionel Messi become one of the greatest footballers in history. It is the same thing that determines how tall you are, how much muscle you can build, and possibly how long you will live. And why, if the research is right, a man who is 5'6" may have acquired biological advantage over a man who's 6'2". So what's going on over here? Let's find out. Andrei Rosimov was born in 1946 in a small village outside Paris. As a child, he grew up alongside 4 siblings. None of them were unusual. Andre was. By the age of 12, he was already 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed around 240 pounds. By his teenage years, he was towering over grown men. The cause was a tumor on his pituitary gland, a small structure at the base of the brain. The tumor was pumping out enormous amounts of growth hormone. In children, before the bones fully harden, this produces a condition called gigantism. Once the growth plates close in late adolescence, the same excess of hormone continues to thicken and deform the bones, which is called acromegaly. Andre had both sequentially from the same root cause. Growth hormone does not act on tissues directly. It signals the liver to produce a second hormone called IGF-1, that's insulin-like growth factor. IGF-1 is what actually tells your bones to lengthen, your muscles to enlarge, and your organs to grow. In Andre's case, his organs grew too, including his heart. By his early 40s, he was suffering from chronic pain, joint problems, and a heart that has become too large to keep up with the demands placed on it. The medical term is called cardiomegaly, simply meaning an enlarged heart. It's not a separate disease per se, it is a symptom of the underlying condition, and in Andre's case, it eventually led to congestive heart failure. Now, consider a completely different story. In 1998, in Rosario, Argentina, a small boy of 11 was diagnosed with the opposite problem. His name was Lionel Messi. His body was not producing enough growth hormone, so doctors predicted he would never grow taller than 4 feet 7. Every night for 3 years, Messi injected synthetic growth hormone into his thigh. So he grew. Today he stands about 5 feet 7, short by football standards, but still enough. So we have 2 cases. Too much of growth hormone in one direction produces a giant whose heart is failing at 46, and too little of it, corrected with injections, produces an athlete who plays at the highest level into his 30s. This is interesting on its own, but the real puzzle is not in these 2 cases. The real puzzle is what happens when you study the rest of us, the ordinary people in the middle, because the same hormone that built Andre's body and rebuilt Messi's body is something every one of us is exposed to during our growing years. The question is how much and for how long, and how does it matter? Before we go into the human studies, let's look at dogs. Across species, larger animals tend to live longer than the small ones. A whale outlives a mouse. A human outlives a rat. This is the rule when you compare across species. But within a single species, the rule reverses. A Chihuahua weighing about 5 pounds often lives 14 to 20 years. A Great Dane weighing well over 100 pounds typically lives only 7 to 10 years. Same species, same general biology, the smaller dog roughly doubles the lifespan of the larger one. And it's not just lifespan. Larger dogs are more prone to joint disease, heart problems, and certain cancers, particularly bone cancer, which strikes against the giant breeds at much higher rates than smaller breeds. The bigger the dog, the shorter and harder its life tends to be. Why? The leading explanation involves growth hormone and IGF-1 again. Large dog breeds have been selectively bred for size, and they tend to have higher levels of IGF-1 during development. That extra growth signal builds a bigger animal, but it appears to come with a cost paid later in the form of accelerated aging and disease. If this pattern holds within dogs, the obvious question is, does it hold within humans? One of the cleanest comparisons came from records at the Veterans Administration Medical Center in San Diego. When researchers looked at men with similar access to healthcare and income, men shorter than about 175 centimeters, roughly 5'9", lived on average nearly 5 years longer than taller men. Men shorter than 170 centimeters, about 5'6", lived around 7.5 years longer than men over 6 feet tall. Lighter men outlived heavier men by similar margins. A separate study followed more than 8,000 American men of Japanese ancestry in Hawaii for over 40 years. The researchers found a clear positive association between height and mortality. Taller men died sooner. They also found that shorter men were more likely to carry a protective version of a gene called FOXO3, which is one of the most consistently identified longevity genes in human biology. The shorter men also had lower fasting insulin levels and lower rates of cancer. The Veterans Administration study and the Hawaii study agree on the direction. Within a population of men with similar resources, shorter and lighter individuals tend to outlive the taller and the heavier ones, sometimes by a substantial margin. On one end, you have people like Andre, who has acromegaly, lifelong excess growth hormone, and a very high IGF-1. On the other hand, is a condition called Laron syndrome. This is the genetic opposite of what we have seen up till now. People with Laron syndrome cannot respond to growth hormone. Their receptors are broken. So they produce growth hormone, but their bodies cannot use it. Their IGF-1 levels are extremely low throughout their life. They are short, usually 4 feet or under as adults. And here is what the research has found. Primarily through work led by Jaime Guevara Aguirre and Walter Longo on a cohort of people with Laron syndrome in Ecuador. Over decades of observation in a population where cancer struck their unaffected relatives at normal rates, almost no one with Laron syndrome developed cancer. They were also protected from type 2 diabetes, even though many of them were obese. But here is the part that is often misreported. People with Laron syndrome do not live longer than the general population. In some cohorts, they die earlier from accidents, alcohol use, and untreated cardiovascular issues. The protection from cancer and diabetes is dramatic. The protection from death overall is not. So we have a IGF-1 group dying early from cancer and heart disease. A low IGF-1 group almost never getting cancer or diabetes, but not living dramatically longer. And everyone else somewhere in the middle. Which raises the obvious question. Is there a sweet spot? In 2022, a large meta-analysis was published in the Journal of Aging Cell. It pooled data from 19 studies covering more than 30,000 people. The researchers were asking a simple question. Across the general population, where on the IGF-1 spectrum is mortality lowest? The answer was a U-shape. People with a very low IGF-1 had higher mortality. People with very high IGF-1 also had higher mortality. The lowest mortality sat in a middle range, roughly 120 to 160 nanograms per milliliter. There is a concept in evolutionary biology called antagonistic pleiotropy. It is a long name for a simple idea. Some genes that help you in early life hurt you in late life. Evolution doesn't care. Evolution cares about reproduction, not about how long you live after you have finished reproducing. If a gene makes you grow tall and strong and reproductively successful at 25, evolution will keep that gene even if it raises your cancer risk at 65. This is what IGF-1 looks like in evolutionary terms. It is an antagonistic pleiotropy gene. It builds your body during growth, supports reproduction, and powers your metabolism through young adulthood. Then it slowly turns into a liability, driving cell proliferation in tissues that should be quieting down, raising cancer risk, and contributing to cardiovascular stress. The practical question is, can you do anything about this? If high IGF-1 increases cancer risk and IGF-1 is what builds muscle, doesn't that mean lifting weights is bad for longevity? Doesn't muscle growth involve cell division, which is exactly what we are saying causes problems? The answer is no, and here is why. The IGF-1 that matters for cancer risk and overall mortality is the IGF-1 circulating in your blood, the systemic level produced mostly by your liver. The IGF-1 that builds muscle in response to strength training is mostly local. So when you lift, your muscle tissue produces IGF-1 inside the muscle itself, in short bursts that act locally and then fade. The systemic circulating level is not pushed sky high by resistance training in healthy adults. More importantly, muscle mass in itself is one of the strongest predictors of lifespan. Grip strength alone predicts mortality better than many standard blood markers. Sarcopenia, the loss of muscle with age, is one of the major drivers of frailty, falls, and early death. Strength training prevents that. You do not want to push circulating IGF-1 high by overeating protein, taking growth hormone, or using anabolic drugs, but you absolutely want to maintain muscle through resistance training. These are not the same thing. Lifting weights does not chronically elevate your systemic IGF-1 the way chronic overnutrition or hormonal use does. The signaling pathway involved in muscle growth, called mTOR, is activated in pulses by resistance training and then returns to baseline. It is chronic, sustained activation, the kind you get from constant overeating, particularly of protein, in a sedentary body. The practical implication is that the way to live in sweet spot is roughly this. Build and maintain muscle through resistance training. Don't overeat, particularly protein, if you're not working out that much. Stay lean, spend some time in a fasted state most days. Keep blood glucose levels and insulin levels at optimal levels. These are the things that keep systemic IGF-1 in the healthy middle range while preserving the muscle and bone. You need to avoid the low end of the U curve. Height itself is not something you can change. If you're tall, you're tall. The statistical association between shorter stature and longer life is real but modest, and many other factors matter more. Sleep, exercise, nutrition, social connection, avoiding tobacco and excessive alcohol. What you can influence is your IGF-1 over the second half of your life. The aim is to stay in the middle of the U curve. The factors that move you there are largely the ones that produce general health. What you do not want to do is take growth hormone for anti-aging purposes, or use anabolic compounds, or eat far more protein than your body needs in the belief that more is always better. The giants of history died young because their bodies were given a signal they couldn't switch off. For the rest of us, the signal can be adjusted. And the adjustment mostly is the boring stuff, done consistently for a long time. That's what longevity actually looks like.